and welcome to the Positive Psychology News webinar. We're thrilled because today our guest is Christine Duvivier. Hi, Christine.
Hi, Senya.
Hi. I'm going to give you a bio of Christine, and then I'll be asking questions for about 40 minutes, and then the audience, the attendees, will be asking questions for the last 20 minutes. So here we go. Christine, we're especially psyched that Christine is here because on Positive Psychology News, we care about positive psychology and how people can be the best at what they're doing, whether it's at work, at school, in anything. And Christine has a really new and interesting angle on it that is about unleashing our gifts. So I'm really excited that we'll talk about it. So let me give you her bio and then we can get to the content. Okay. You should know about Christine that she's an international speaker and author and really a positive psychology mentor. And I think the word mentor is key because you'll see that Christine works with two very different populations. She works with kids and teens, and she also works with executives, and she's been working with executives for decades. So here we go. She's guided thousands to new levels of success, confidence, and happiness. She's the author of What I'd Say If You Wouldn't Roll Your Eyes, Love Notes to My Child, and the author of Appreciating Beauty in the Bottom 80. Christine builds on her experiences as a Fortune 50 leader, as a positive psychology master, and a mother. With her laser focus on the hidden genius, on leadership, and on true potential in each of us, she refutes this not good enough myth, and she replaces it with her model that really holds our spirit and well-being at its core. Today, we'll be talking about unleashing hidden genius. Now, before we start, just a few more things about Christine. Christine's research identified that hidden gifts, these hidden gifts that we're talking about, that even successful adults may not recognize it in themselves and others. She'll also talk to us about this in youth. And bigger than anything that I can share with you in her bio, Christine really believes that each of us, no matter how we're performing now, we have tremendous potential in these specific gifts that we can share with the world, as do our children and our employees. Christine holds an MBA from Cornell, and she holds a Master of Applied Positive Psychology from UPenn. I always wonder whether it's a master or master's. I know it's a master, but I feel like saying master's. And she holds a Master in Applied Positive Psychology from UPenn. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you, Senya. It's great to be here, so thanks for having me.
We're thrilled. So this is the way we do our PPNs. We have 6 rapid fire questions that we'll just go at the beginning before we get into the unleashing hidden genius content. Okay. What do you most want people to know after they've been with us for the next hour?
That there is nothing wrong with you or with your child. And you can extend that to grandchildren, nieces, nephews, employees. But at the heart of it is there's nothing, this is what I believe, there's nothing wrong with you or with your child.
So looking forward to getting into that. Okay, let's do a few more rapid fires. If you could snap your fingers and almost everyone in the world were to do one thing, what would that one thing be?
I think the first thing would be stop believing what I call the education myths. Okay, these are myths about education, and we can talk about them more, but that's the one thing I'd love to see people do, is just stop believing these myths.
And what do you want them to replace those beliefs with?
So what they can replace them with is actually truths about how people succeed and thrive in life. And you know, the number one thing I hear from parents and leaders is happiness. And it's really funny because, you know, I think, well, okay, like that's like that fluffy word or whatever. But you know, when people really think about what it means to succeed in school, or what it means to be a great leader, or what it means to have a career, and they keep coming back to words like confidence and happiness. So I would like to see them replace the myths with truth about how people really do succeed and thrive in life.
So looking forward to getting into that. We will. Okay, very, very cool. What did you want to be when you grew up?
That's a really tough question for me. Other people told me to be a teacher. Other people said like that was the right career for me or whatever. But I think I just wanted to play tennis. And I definitely wanted to teach my kids to ski because like I just skied a couple times when I was a kid and my family didn't ski. And I wanted to be a mom that took her kids skiing. Those were my big ambitions in life.
So very cool. So you wanted to play a lot of tennis. You wanted to teach your kids to ski, and other people thought that you should be a teacher.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. So I think that's pretty fun and pretty related to what we're going to be talking about, because you're saying what you wanted to do is sports.
It was, but I didn't really, I mean, I did that in my spare time.
Yeah.
I didn't really listen to that because I didn't know what I know now.
Exactly. So we'll put a pause on it. We'll come back to it in just a moment. Cool. What is the bravest thing you have ever done?
So, Sonia, I don't think I'm a brave person at all. So there are things I've done that other people told me were unbelievably brave, but they just felt normal, like kind of normal to me. They were just things I thought needed to be done or whatever. I'd say, I mean, this is going to sound really silly, but the bravest thing I've ever done is get on the Humunga Cowabunga slide at Disney World.
What is that? I don't know that slide. What is it?
It's this, like, I don't know. I think it's a 45-degree angle, but like I'm probably way off there. I have no idea about these things. But basically, you feel like you're falling off a cliff on a slide. And I did it because my 9-year-old really, really, really wanted to go on it and needed me to go on it with her. And I'm not afraid of heights, but I'm terrified of edges. So doing something that feels like sliding off the edge of a cliff was terrifying. And actually, the whole way down, it was terrifying. Like, I should have had a heart attack on the way down because the whole experience was terrifying. So I actually don't know if that counts as brave or not, but I'll throw it in that category.
You did it. And professionally speaking, or work-wise, or life-wise, a parallel experience?
Well, other people say that it was really brave that when I was just like a mid-level manager in a Fortune 50 company, I went to the CFO and told him we had to completely change direction or our company wouldn't survive. But that, for me, didn't feel very brave because, like, well, when we talk about gifts, you'll understand what I didn't understand then, but I was actually using kind of a gift of mine. And also, I just knew in my heart that's what the company needed to do. So I wasn't afraid to go forward and say that. But other people, like, have said that was, like, a really brave thing that I did because it was like it was a company that was downsizing by 50% and cost cutting was everything and the bottom line was everything. And I said, well, you need to do something really different to engage customers and employees and focus on that.
And did your CFO listen?
You know what? I did not know him before I went to do that. He was amazing. He was a really, really good listener. And he did. He listened and we put a whole thing together and it was like one of the really fun parts of my career.
I don't know if you've heard, but research by that Monica Warline is always, it might be her research, but she's always citing, is that we often don't recognize bravery in ourselves. It takes others to recognize it in us.
Oh, okay.
So that's really neat.
That's interesting because, like, I don't know. I guess I don't know what bravery feels like. Like, I'm not the person that could jump in the middle of the subway and say, like, throw myself on somebody and let the train run over me, right? Like, to me, that looks like bravery. I don't know what it feels like, but what people say was brave didn't feel brave to me.
And it sounds like it didn't feel brave because it felt like the right thing to do. It felt true.
It felt true. It was like in my heart, I knew this was the right thing for the company. I mean, obviously I've done a lot of research. I've worked with other companies, et cetera. But yeah, and I don't have a problem going to very, very senior people who are, much more powerful than me and have no clue who I am and talking to them if I think there's something that needs to.
Neat. Wonderful. Wonderful. What is the most important thing in the world?
Okay. It's really hard not to be cliche.
Cliche. I invite you.
Okay. I think, all right, I've got a tie here. So I'm going to go with awe because I think it's going to tie into what we're talking about today. I think awe is the most important thing in the world. And the reason I say that is that I think when I have a sense of awe or when someone else has a sense of awe, it's this deep sense of sort of love and appreciation and inspiration with what we're seeing in front of us. And I just think that's, an incredibly remarkable experience, state of being, and it allows us to bring things out of ourselves and others that maybe otherwise we couldn't.
Yeah, we have not had that answer. We've been doing these webinars. We haven't had an answer like that. That's delightful to hear. And what was it tied with, Christine?
It was tied with loving, because I believe that we are born to be loving beings. And I think the world teaches us that we're supposed to try to like attract love to us. But I think, you know, and I've come to this very late in life, believe me, Sonia, but I really believe that when we flow love to other people and other things, that's what fulfills us. So that was what it was tied with.
And loving. Thank you. And this may be quite related to what we're about to jump into, but our last of the rapid fires is, Christine, what is something only you can do?
I don't think there's anything that only I can do. I can't think of a thing. I think anything I can do, anyone else can do, often better, but not always. I honestly, Sonia, can you give me a hint? I can't think of a thing that I can do that some.
I don't know any other person who works both with leaders and with teens. I don't know any other one.
Oh, okay.
And we know a lot. We know 400 MAP alums.
Oh, okay. Well, I think other people could do it if they wanted to, but maybe I'm the only one doing it right now. Okay, I'm with you on that.
Okay, so let's jump in.
Okay.
Unleashing, and you've talked about it as unleashing hidden genius, as unleashing gifts. Can you start with giving us the landscape? What existed before you started doing your research? What was the dominating idea that everybody had?
So this would get into what I call the education myth.
Right.
And the first one is the most important to me. But the other, actually, I won't say that anymore because the second one is really important to me now. But, the first one I discovered, can I just back up for a second? I discovered, so I was in the Master of Positive Psychology program at Penn. I was well down the road on my research on how you bring out the highest levels of motivation in people. That was what I was excited about. And then out of the blue, on a March afternoon, my daughter's senior year of high school, I got a phone call and I heard, Sam, suicide. And Senya, it was like all the air was sucked right out of me. This was an 18-year-old that I knew who was gone.
This was a friend of your daughter's?
And so that threw me into a complete tailspin. I decided I wasn't doing the research that I wasn't going to continue. I didn't know what to do next. I told George Valiant and Chris Peterson were my two advisors.
Oh my gosh, you had the heaven of advisors. That's so fun.
I got in touch with them both and I said, this is what happened. I am underwater here. I'm not going to continue with what I'm doing and I have no idea what I'm going to do instead. And so then gradually, little by little, as I muddled through this, I came to find out that this boy, I'll call him Sam, he was not a good student and he didn't like school. But he had a lot of friends. He had done this incredible leadership activity where he'd gotten different boards of the town to agree on a path he wanted to create for kids, and he'd like arranged it all and everything. He had, unbelievable potential. But he was the only senior in our high school that year who wasn't going to go to college. He didn't want to. So I just out of that experience, I came to realize that a lot of kids feel stuck and they don't know, what their potential is or where to go in life. And, like a lot of kids, Sam was trying to figure out where he fit. And so that is what led me to do this research on what I call the bottom 80%. And that's kids who are not in the top 20% of their classes. That's what I did. And so that was middle school and high school. So I give you that background to say that what was prevailing at that time, and actually still now, is this idea that if you're not a top, so this is the first myth, I call it the myths of education. If you're not a good student, there's something wrong with you. You're lazy, you're dumb, you're an underachiever, you're unmotivated, you have a learning disability. There's something wrong with you.
Let's put you in remedial classes. Let's get a tutor. Let's monitor your homework. Just let's all of this monitoring.
Yeah. And you're not going to, well, this gets into the second education myth, which I call them. So that's the myth of the bad student. The myth of the good student, which I only came to, so the myth of the bad student I saw as I interviewed these kids. The myth of the good student I saw as I reflected on everything I'd done in the research, and then realized, you know, you studied, I studied Marty Seligman's work, and, you know, on what leads to depression, and Karen Ravitch and others' work on resilience. And I realized that we had this myth 2 and myth 3. Myth 2 is what I call the myth of the good student. So we've got the myth of the bad student, but the myth of the good student is be a good student. And there's a few pieces to it, but basically, you know, you're going to go to a great quote unquote college, and then you're going to get a great quote unquote job, and then you're going to make a lot of money, and then you're going to be happy for life. So be a good student and you're going to have a good life. And if you're not, there's not a lot of hope for you.
So one is the myth of the bad student. Second is the myth of the good student. What's
the myth of the bad student? That's, you know, if you're a bad student, there's something wrong with you. Second is the myth of the good student. If you're a good student, you're going to have a great life. And we now know, and I know just because of people that come to me and come to talks and everything, and also all the academics and teachers and everybody that I talk to, I mean, the levels of anxiety and depression in top students are extraordinary. So, but the third myth is what I call the myth of the best system. So in business, I was trained at looking at systems, like a whole system, if you want to create change in a big organization or big community. And again, what I realized was if you draw on the research that we know about what leads to depression and anxiety, and this is from, you know, Marty Seligman, our friend and mentor. This is from Judy Crocker and some of her associates. There's a lot of different people that I pulled together here. But basically, the myth of the best system says that our system of education, and I mean parents, educators, voters, government, and schools. So I'm not talking only about schools. I'm talking about the whole community. Oh, and the media. Can't forget the media. That our system of education is best for most teens. Like, sure, you know, there's some that it doesn't fit for, but for most teens, this is the best system. And I say that's a myth because I can actually show how the way we've structured it as a society, including school, but also the way we teach kids to think about themselves in school, is exactly mirroring what we know causes depression and anxiety in individuals.
I haven't heard you say that, but that resonates in terms of everything I've read in the media and have heard from friends who have teens. Yeah, yeah. I want to hear the 3 truths from you as well. So is that right? Like these are the 3 myths and you have truths that counteract them?
Yeah, you know, it's really hard to say, like, these are truths. I'm going to just say this is what I believe, and I think people could come to see these as truths. But, you know, to like say I have the truth is kind of...
I am the Buddha, right.
But, okay, so myth of the bad student. The truth is, if you start, all you have to do is start in your own neighborhood, right? Start with your own family, friends, neighbors. Start looking for all the people who are successful. That can include great wealth, I don't care how you define it, and happy. And you will find there are tons of them that were not great students and didn't go to great schools. The other piece of the truth that flips the bad student on its head is what we are talking about today, which is I ended up discovering what I call gifts that conflict with school. And what I mean by that, there's 7 gifts, and what I mean by that is that in general, not every single school, but most schools, and by the way, I've been asked to speak internationally about this. I can tell you that it's not just a US or a certain community. But in general, often what kids are asked to do in school, what they're graded on, the way they're viewed, what they're thought of, are actually in conflict with these gifts. So rather than having something wrong with them, rather than like if you're a bad student, there's something wrong with you, the truth is there's something really right with you that would make you wildly successful, but it's in conflict with what you're being asked to do.
It's interesting. It sounds like both of these truths that you've mentioned, they kind of overlap the myths. Like this one that you just said, that's both about the system and the, oh, if you're a bad student, you need to be fixed.
Right, that's true. It's absolutely
really interesting. So you're kind of saying, it sounds like here are these three things, but let's look at them in whole, and we may see that these other truths encompass them and contradict them.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Christine, is this, we hadn't practiced this. Are the 7 things that are the gifts, is that something you could go into?
Yes.
Okay. So I encourage our attendees to, in the chat box where everybody can see, as Christine is going through these, let us know which one you are. So I went on ChristineDuvivier.com and I took the, is it called Unleashing Hidden Gifts assessment?
Yeah, the tab might say Unleashing Hidden Gifts. It's called the Duvivier assessment, D-U-V-I.
And is that for Duvivier?
Yeah, just less of a mouthful.
But it's cool. I was like, oh, what's this fancy assessment? So I went on Christine's site. I did this assessment and I got my results. And so Christine, I'm asking her to tell what are these things, these gifts that are in conflict with school. And I invite our attendees to listen for what might have been in conflict for you when you were in school and which of these you may have. And I invite you to type that into the chat box. So we're in this interactive party. Please go on, Christine. What are these things that are in conflict?
So one is the gift of visioning. And by the way, I learned about this from a man named Ron Davis, who's got a book called, I think it's called The Gift of Dyslexia, or The Gifts of Dyslexia. So this visioning, and Senya, I want to just back up for a second, because in my research, one of the things I did was I looked at multiple intelligences, Howard Gardner's work, and a lot of us are familiar with that. There's a couple places where these gifts absolutely overlap that. But there were a number of places where they were more nuanced. And when I talked to my advisors, George and Chris, about that, they said, it's just because I was coming from grounded theory research, building up from what I saw in people. So visioning is one of those where it's not just about like visual learning, because lots of people like me.
I'm smiling because so many of us have never heard of grounded theory research until Brene Brown popped on the scene. But Christine Duvivier was doing this at the same time Brene Brown was doing this. I love hearing this. I
think it's just a form of, and also like I think we at the time we might have called it case study or something, but it's basically, yeah, very similar. She gave us new language for some of the things we were doing. So visioning is not just about like learning visually, because a lot of people love to learn visually. Visioning is people who actually, at the highest level, and it's a spectrum, all of these are a spectrum, but at the highest level, these are kids who can see things in their mind's eye, or adults. They can actually, see in their mind's eye, they can rotate objects 360 degrees in their head. They think in pictures, they do not think in words, and they might, like one girl described it to me as, it's like a movie running through my head. So this one, an example of why it conflicts with school is that, most of school, in most schools, is built around reading and writing. And I had grown up believing if you didn't read and write well, you weren't very smart. Well, it turns out there's people that are, absolutely everyone would agree are geniuses out there who didn't read and write well. And so it's because their brains really don't process in words. And words come into your brain much slower. So words come in at, somewhere between 150 and 300 words a minute, depending on how fast you are. If you think about pictures being worth 1,000 words, a movie running through your mind might be processing 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 words in the same time that you're supposed to read 300 words. So it's orders of magnitude different. Okay, so that's visioning. Second one is, just make sure I get to 7. Okay, I'm doing it off the top of my head. Exploration. So one young girl, Kara, is a great example of this. She hated to swim, didn't hate to swim, hated to be taught is what I want to say. And that's what this gift is about. It's people who love to learn, but they don't like to be taught by others. So she didn't like to be taught from the youngest of ages. And as an example, she wouldn't take swim lessons, but she watched kids swimming. In 7th grade, she made the highly competitive swim team. In her, like, I know kids that took lessons for years and didn't make that swim team. She taught herself.
So Christine, how about if someone takes the assessment, the Duvivier assessment, and they do not get any of the 7th? What if they actually were great students in the academic system that we have? What if they get none of them?
Yeah, it means nothing, because when I started out, Senya, I was hoping there was going to be this compendium of gifts, like a list of gifts, just like we have the VIA of strengths, the values in action, character strengths. So those are defined in the moral domain. And I also wanted to look at gifts, which I defined as innate abilities outside the moral domain. So that's the only distinction I was really making. And I was hoping I could just go find a list of gifts, assess people on them. Well, it didn't exist. There was no rhyme or reason. I mean, there's huge, huge volumes about gifts, and they don't all agree with each other about what it means, et cetera, et cetera. And there was no list I could use. So instead, out of the interviews that I did, what I ended up doing was seeing out of the data these 7 gifts that are actually in conflict with school. So I'm not trying to name every gift that's possible. I'm just trying to name the ones that I see that are in conflict with school.
I can imagine homeschoolers really wanting your work because they have the opportunity to use these gifts. They're not in that enclosed system.
Yes, yes. Although also, Senya, even if you're in that system, that's one of the things I say to audiences, parents, teachers, et cetera, communities, is even if you're in that system, you can be using your gifts. Maybe you have to do it outside of schoolwork. But kids usually, especially at younger ages, do gravitate to using their gifts. They just don't value them. No one around them values them. They just think, I can do that, or I like doing that. But they don't think it's anything that's going to take them anywhere in life.
Kind of like a certain person who 15 minutes ago told us it's not really brave for a middle manager to go to the CFO. I think that's brilliant what you're talking about now, because that has so many parallels for us who have studied positive psych with strengths. If I realize, if I come to know that curiosity is a strength, I can use that without letting anyone know. I don't have to broadcast to the world or to my friends, now I'm using curiosity in meetings, but I can start to use it and I come more alive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things about these gifts that I've come to realize is that they immediately draw on sort of this energy beyond you. So they get you into what Mike Csikszentmihalyi calls a state of flow. But they get you into this almost like the best word I think I could use would be like flow or meditative sort of quality, but they get them into this broader energy that really is connected with the core essence of who they are as soon as they start to use it. It's really incredible.
I'm having a hunch about our attendees because I've written for them visioning and exploration. I'm having a hunch they're waiting for all 7 before they pipe up and say what they are. I just realized that. So let's give them all 7 and then ask them what they think.
Are kids that love to learn but don't like to be taught. Third is the gift of grace. So this is a really interesting one to me. These are kids who have an ease of motion and emotion. It's really interesting. It's on the playing field and it's in social situations. So these are kids who, from the youngest of ages, very easily picked up new athletic activities. For example, one young boy, his mother just said, everything he touched from the time he was 2 years old, he could just do it. He could do it naturally, he could do it gracefully. 7th grade, he gets invited to be on the high school tennis team, which he turned down because he just does it for the fun of it. Yeah, so kids like that. But what's interesting with these kids with grace is that, and adults too, okay, so every time I say it's kids, that's because my research started with the kids, but now I've tested this with a lot of adults.
We're going to get to that, by the way, for the audience. Christine and I touched base about this before the webinar. I really want to touch on her overlap from kids to adults. So we'll get to that. Please go on.
So Gift of Grace, these people are people who can walk into very tense situations and just take the edge off, just ease everything a little bit. And what's really interesting, Senya, is that frequently people with the Gift of Grace are told that they are slow processors, or they have a processing issue in school. Or even if they weren't told that they have a processing issue in school, they think of themselves as a little slower than your average person. They take information in a little bit more slowly. They need a tiny bit more time to process it. It's just a little bit. But what's interesting about that is that gifted athletes, like say, when I read about professional athletes, a lot of times, I'm not saying all of them because there's many ways you can come to a career. It doesn't have to be only through one gift, but it's not unusual for a gifted athlete to be able to slow the ball down in her mind's eye or his mind's eye. And even like in a tense situation, you think about having an extra split second and just slowing things down for a second, take the edge off. So it's really, I think, a very interesting gift. And so here's the thing, in school, if people are talking as fast as I'm talking right now, I am a fast speaker, and you're trying to take in information and you take it in more slowly, that's going to be an issue for you in school. Does not mean you're not brilliant. So that's Grace. Let's see, another one is self-clarity. So these are people who are so clear about who they are and who they're not, that they are not afraid of strengths in others, and they are not afraid to tell others their weaknesses. But they will not change themselves. Again, it's a spectrum, right? But, at the highest end, a lot of times the kids with self-clarity are not going to change themselves to fit into somebody else's mold. So that can cause some problems in school.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's another gift. Self-motivation. This is, a kid like Matt had 140 IQ, would sit for hours reading huge volumes about whatever interested him, was a C student in school, in high school. What's he labeled? Underachiever, unmotivated.
Could even be lazy. I mean, lots of labels. Yeah. It's easy for all of us to label.
Right. Well, we're taught to. But yeah, by the society around us, for sure. But so here's the thing about kids like Matt. I told you, I started out studying motivation and how you bring out the highest motivation in people. So of course, DC and Ryan's work, other people like Abraham Maslow, there's a lot of people who've done work on motivation. Turns out the highest form of motivation is when you do something simply for the pleasure of doing it, for the interest in it, for the inherent joy of it. So turns out kids like Matt are unbelievably self-motivated, very high in the gift of self-motivation. Grades, teachers' opinions, parents' opinions, those are motivators, but they are a much lower form of motivation. Those are external motivators. So self-motivation is exactly the opposite of what we think normally about kids like Matt, but that's the next gift. How many have I given you? 5?
5.
Okay. So, okay. So I'm using my hands a lot. I do not actually have this gift, but in very high levels, but manual dexterity is the next gift. And that's one that does overlap with multiple intelligences. I think he calls it kinesthetic or something. Manual dexterity is people who are good with their hands. They're very good at putting things together, taking things apart. In school, there was one boy in my study who ended up going to a technical, like a VOTech school, and his teacher said to his mother, if I want to know about some battle in history, this kid knows more in history than anybody I know, because he sets it up with like pennies and quarters and coins, and he moves it around physically. He was allowed to do that. On a written test, nope, doesn't do well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one other thing I want to say about manual dexterity, Senya, is this. Most people think, like, when I say this, a lot of people say things like, or even if I just talk about the bottom 80%, people will immediately revert to things like, oh, yes, you know, that's why it's important to have shop class in a school, or that's why it's important, you know, not everybody should go to college, you know, that's why it's important to have blue-collar jobs. And I agree with all of that. But the thing I want to say is these kids in the bottom 80% and kids with manual dexterity could, yes, do something like become a plumber and, you know, spend the entire summer in a gorgeous house on Cape Cod, as my plumber does, right? They could, for sure. But they could also be a Nobel Prize winner, as Vernon Smith is, who dropped out of high school. So,
and now there's so much work in design, like IDEO and companies like that, or other companies wanting design. And that's, they do so many prototypes, not just virtual, but actual prototypes. Yeah.
So there's many, many ways to use these gifts. So I just don't want to limit our thinking suddenly because I said that to only certain career paths would be appropriate for them. Okay, so that's manual dexterity. And then the last one is the gift of oratory. So oratory is the gift of the spoken word. And so this is different. This is what I learned. This is different from other kinds of language intelligence. You could have the gift of oratory and not be very good at reading or writing. And in fact, it's very common for people with the gift of oratory to not like writing or not be good at writing. So Senya, I will just share with you and this group, for the first 8 years that I was doing this work, never even dawned on me to think about it for myself, because this was the bottom 80%, blah, 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 you know, whatever. One day I realized, oh, because by the way, I should say about these gifts, you don't have to excel. Like, you don't have to be the best public speaker to have the gift of oratory. It just has to be something that's authentically you. You love it. You're good at it, whatever. So all of a sudden one day I'm working with somebody and it dawns on me, I hated to write. I still hate to write. I started my University of Pennsylvania application to MAP with I hate to write, which I learned from my own daughter's application. I mean, I could always speak to anybody, right? I can go talk to the CFO, CEO, anybody, even when I'm like the most junior person in the company. But ask me to write an essay, I hate it. So that's not unusual for people with oratory.
And that's so ironic, because one of the things I wanted to ask you about is I went to your blog on ChristineDuvivier.com, but your blog reads like you're speaking to me.
Oh, is that right?
Completely. I'll just read a few phrases from different things. Can we believe we are almost in May? Winter was busy for me with lots of so-and-so. I've been thinking a lot about how we pay attention. What do you think is the most common mistake? I mean, it just sounds like someone who's talking to me.
Oh, well, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. Well, that's from somebody who doesn't like to write. So,
and that's so interesting. I actually wanted to ask you about that. I wanted to ask, look, why is it that it's so clear and conversational? And now you're telling me I have oratory.
I know, isn't that funny? Yeah, and it didn't dawn on me for the longest time. It didn't dawn on me at all. But I will say one thing. It's the reason when I went to do, I ended up writing these things that are called, that I call What I'd Say If You Wouldn't Roll Your Eyes. They're quotes I used to send out every 2 weeks. Now I'm not as good about that. No, 2 a week, I should say. I used to send out 2 a week. But if anybody wants to be on my list, it's absolutely free, and it's, you know, you can sign up on my website.
And we're going to share, this is the part about Connect, right? If people go to ChristineDuvivier.com/connect, and we'll share that right now in the comments. Please go on.
So what would happen is I had started learning all these wonderful things, and I would share them with my clients, and I'd see the difference it made with people I was speaking to or working with. But when I go tell my own kids, who were now at that point grown, you know, oh, this would be a better way of thinking about things, or whatever, or thinking about yourself, or whatever. My kids were kind of like thanks, but no thanks, Mom. And so I started just sort of writing down these snippets. And the reason I want to say that is, and then friends started asking me to send them out, and then one thing led to another, and then people said, please put these into a book, you know, and so but the reason that they're only a couple sentences at a time is because they're coming from someone who doesn't like to write. So I just try to boil the thought down to its essence, like what I would say to my kid if they were standing there.
Can you give us one or two of them?
All right. One that I can remember off the top of my head is, I've made a new resolution. I'll do my best to be happy even when you're not. And then there's a little tagline at the bottom and it says, Happy New Year to us.
Nice.
And I did that one Happy New Year's, and because this was a revelation to me, because there's a thing out there, you know, when you say, well, what's the prevalent thinking? There's a saying out there among parents that I've heard multiple times, which is, you're only as happy as your unhappiest child.
And you're saying, no, let's flip that.
We can flip that. And I came to understand that late, but I wanted my children to understand that, which they said, yeah, thanks, but no thanks, Mom. So I shared it with everybody else.
Nice. We are at the 40-minute mark, and I am inviting the attendees to send us questions. So you can type them right into the Q&A. I'll do a little summary of what we talked about so far, and in the meantime, you can type them into your Q&A. So we've talked about what the prevalent understanding was previous to you coming on the scene, especially the 3 myths of education. The myth of the bad student, the myth of the good student, and the myth of the what system?
Best system.
The best system. This is the best system, right? And then Christine gave us the counteracting ideas, the ideas that really counteract all 3 of these together. And then we've just in the comments put the 7 gifts that you can find on ChristineDuvivier.com with the Duvi assessment. So I invite the attendees to do two things. And this is, you don't have to do both at once, but either type in a question to the Q&A or write in the comments which of these gifts you think you are. So I'll start because I just took the assessment, and I'll write what mine are, if I remember how to spell oratory. And it was really fun to do because I got these and I didn't know what the results would be when I actually got them. So please, the invitation is there for you to write your comments into the chat so Christine can make some comments about what you're writing, and also to send in our questions. And there's one other topic that we will get to in between the questions, which is the grown-ups as opposed to kids topic. So we'll start with a question that one person is asking. One person just typed in, how do these gifts apply to adults? Thank you.
So what happened was, you know, my work was always with leaders, even, you know, before I went to positive psychology. So when I did this research,
Christine, just for the audience, you do business consulting, you do coaching, you do consulting, right? Is there anything else you want to add in terms of the background of what your main work has been up until this research?
Well, that's what it was up until I went to positive psychology, and now I do a lot more speaking, which I love to do, since I love to connect with people, and so much rather speak to them than write with them. So what happened was I hadn't intended when I did this research to do anything with it. It was essentially a cathartic exercise for me when I was grieving this young man. And Senya, actually, I should tell you that myth number 2, the myth of the good student, I began getting people coming to me who have kids who are very high-performing students. And I began seeing anxiety and depression and all sorts of issues, right? But recently, a woman I know, top student daughter, like wonderful kid, like amazing accolades, lots of friends, died by suicide, going to an Ivy League school, you know, heartbreaking. So that just happened recently, but it reinforced for me these myths. But at that time, I wasn't intending to do anything with this. It was a cathartic exercise because really I just wanted to make some kind of statement that this boy had more going on than people thought, you know, and so that's why I looked at gifts, and that these kids have more going on than we think. But it ended up leading into new work. So I do still work with leaders, and I do a lot of coaching of leaders and other kinds of professionals, but what happened was people started asking me, you know, to work with families, and et cetera. So what happened, and getting back to the question, is that I was working with adults, and if people were really successful, I'm not thinking they need to assess their the gifts that conflict with school, right? But then I started realizing that some really successful people weren't, I mean, I already knew that generally, but I didn't necessarily know it about my clients, but were still carrying scars from their school days. And so then I started to give some people the gifts assessment, like if they wanted to try it or whatever. And now loads of adults have taken the gifts assessment. And I began to realize that this holds true for adults too. And it holds true in the workforce. And so, okay, I'm not sure if that has completely answered the question, but you can redirect me.
How do you use it in your work, like in your coaching work, with business people in terms of this assessment and what they can do after they take it?
Okay, so there's a couple of ways. The first one is just for themselves. So, right, so they take this assessment and, okay, so I'll give you one example, one man, like a phenomenal success. World champion of speaking, public speaking, like on the circuit, whatever. And he was still feeling inside like he was kind of a failure and he had something to hide from people because he couldn't pass a finance exam that he took 3 times back when he was like in his 20s or something. So once he saw that one of his gifts was oratory and that it's in conflict with school, it doesn't necessarily explain why he didn't pass that finance exam, but it makes it irrelevant because it's like, oh, there isn't something wrong with me. There are like really amazingly good things about me that I take for granted. So that's a way that you can use it. Another way is when people are trying to figure out like how to deal with their staffs, for example, or how to lead their organization. So then as they think about their gifts, they can think about, and usually they naturally use them. Oh, so here's an example. So one man had the gift of visioning. So really a lot of difficulty with reading and writing. So what he would do, well, I won't get into his other gift, but anyway, but what he would do is he would give out his reading and writing to other staff members. So he'd say, hey, Senya, read this for me and give me a summary of what you think we should do here. Or, hey, Christine, write a memo to so-and-so or write a report on this. And then he would do what he did best, which was visioning, 5 years out, all the different shifts that were going to happen in his industry and what his company needed to do to line up to be ready for that.
What a great example of both using his own gifts and being able to delegate as a leader to other people who may have those written gifts.
Exactly.
Neat. We have another question in. We have a question that coming back again from adults to kids. A person asks, do you have examples of successful, happy people that had the 7 gifts? And I actually asked, what did they mean specifically? And the question is, when they were at school. So are there people who have found out that they have these gifts while they're in school and been able to become happy and successful within this school system?
Oh, okay. So there's an interesting one. It's not really this research that I did. So, and by the way, most people don't have 7. They usually have like 1 or 2 that are really prominent. And of course, it's possible somebody doesn't have any of them at a very high level. I mean, that's possible too, because as I said, this is a certain set of gifts, but often people have 1 or 2, usually I think 1 or 2 at a pretty pronounced level. So I have an example, I actually have multiple examples of young adults so one of the things it does for young adults is it completely turns their heads around in terms of who they are in a school environment. So one example I'll give you is a young man who just graduated from college and came to me when he was starting his senior year, but he should have already graduated from college. And he had just had years of quote unquote failure in school, just quote unquote struggle, for his parents, it was very difficult. And he was pretty depressed, frankly. And one of the things that understanding his gifts did for him was he could now see himself in a completely new light. Like he could understand that one of his gifts was grace. And so he could understand why he processed things more slowly. So But one of the other things that happened was he also had the gift of exploration. That was the other one. So there's somebody that doesn't like to be taught. He doesn't really like to go into professors and, work with them, as some kids will. But one of the things he was able to do was realize that he could use his gift of grace to go in and be, in two ways. I should start by saying what he did for himself. He could use his gift of grace to be easier in school and not worry so much about how he was performing. And what that actually did, ironically, was helped him to perform a little bit better. And he realized he didn't have to be a straight A student to be smart. He didn't have to be a straight A student to be successful. But he could have been if he wanted to, but that wasn't what he wanted. But the other piece of it was that he realized he could use his gift of grace to just go in and talk with a professor who was particularly prickly and particularly difficult and just ease the situation between them. So that's an example. There's another young girl that I worked with in middle school. Again, sort of similar story, so I won't go into the details. But what happened was her parents kept coming to me in high school saying, like, it's just remarkable how she's turned around. Like, it was going on over years. And for them, it was very important that she go to a particular college, which is a very, very good college. And she did end up doing that. But when people come to me, and her parents were no exception, I say to them, do not come to me if your goal is for your student to be a straight A kid that's going Ivy League, because that's not what I'm about. Like, I'm fine with it if they want to. I'm fine with it if they're very happy doing it, but I'm not about getting them there. In fact, I think it's really unimportant. Saying that, even though, many of us.
That's really cool. Yeah, even though many of us care. We have one question up, which is about university students. So I'll ask that in just a moment. In a preceding that question, here's something that I really wanted to ask you. People came on this call because they wanted to hear about this, unleashing hidden genius. If they want to do more or learn more or work more with this, what should they do?
I think the first thing is just take the Duvivier assessment, or have your kid take it, or your students take it, or whoever, your employees. So do that, so that you do get, even though I don't like to write, you do get a little write-up about what it is. I do intend to do more. I intend to put together something more in-depth that people will be able to get. So get on my list if you would want to receive more information about these gifts and what you can do with them. I'm not at that point yet. The assessment, just came out of beta in the spring. So,
Oh, it's great. It looks so professional. I didn't realize it was so new, Christine. Yeah.
Well, I've been using it for years.
Yeah.
I just hadn't had it as an online version that other people could use, but people requested that. So that's
saying congratulations to you, one of the attendees.
The second thing I would say is that there are articles on my website that really describe the myths better and that talk about a lot of different aspects of this over time. And they're all free. They're all on my blog, so people could look there. There is a paper on the, my research paper on the University of Pennsylvania Scholarly Commons. Unfortunately, because I don't like to write, I did the bulk of my work as a talk. It's a presentation. And the website it was on 11 years ago went by the wayside. But, the guy moved on. He was my technical guy. And so I don't have that online anymore. So the paper is a starting point. It doesn't have everything in it. My talks are where I give it. But those are starting points that I think would help people delve into this further.
Cool. So I'll summarize your points, then I'll ask the university students question. Then we have our last activity for our attendees. We have a last activity that we always do, and then we'll ask Christine a last question. So with all of that, it sounds like you're saying, go to your website, ChristineDuvivier.com, go to ChristineDuvivier.com/connect to get on your mailing list so they learn more as you come out. It sounds like you're saying, go to the website and take the Duvivier assessment because it's there, it's available. And it also sounds like look in the articles for the information on the 3 myths and on the 7 gifts. Is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
I don't name the 7 gifts in articles, I don't think, but there's a lot of information about this that takes it into more depth.
Perfect. And then to be specific on this question, it was, how can I learn more about your 7 Gifts assessment tool? And we just told them, go to your website, ChristineDuvivier.com, take the assessment. And this person is asking, how can they use it to coach university students? They do this one-on-one and in the classroom. How can they use this tool to coach university students?
Yeah, so, well, I've sort of described some things I've done with people, and you can do that. You know, the first thing I think I would ask them after they take it and they get a couple of their top gifts is to say, does this resonate for you? In what ways? How have you used this gift? How are you using it right now? Or how could you use it more right now? Those are some quick, easy ways you could coach students immediately. I think also helping them to understand, I mean, most kids, so it's interesting, you know, Senya, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about the problem with perfectionism. And you know, it was a good article. It's a problem. It relates directly to myth number 2. But the issue is that it tells parents, like, okay, tell your kids it's not that important. You know, tell your kids to take their time, focus on their homework, not the grade. Well, all around our students, and I'm talking about university students too, is a society and a media and everybody that's telling them, if you are not a top student, you're going nowhere in life. And this is gonna dog you for the rest of your days, essentially. And I'm being a little extreme, but you get the gist of it. And so I would say with the university students, one of the things that would be really valuable would be to really help them think through that this is a gift that could take them far in life. And it doesn't have to be just this gift. There's other things they could bring to the table, including their strengths. But this is something that makes them come alive, be more authentically who they are. And it taps them into a stream of energy that's almost undescribable and very, very powerful. And I think I would start working with them around that and just get them even taking some baby steps with it. So those would be some starting points.
That's beautiful. It taps them into a stream of energy for themselves. Okay, we are going to ask Christine a question, and at the same time, somebody is saying, thank you, exactly right. As a career advisor, they're combating that message with their 12 and 17-year-old, and they really appreciate you speaking truths around this. So that person got ahead of the thing that we're going to do in the last 2 minutes, which is at the end of a Positive Psychology News webinar, we ask people, what is your one takeaway? So please feel free to type that into the chat box. I'll read them aloud for the people who will be watching afterwards. What is your takeaway? What are you walking away with that you can take to your home or to your work or to your colleagues or your friends? What do you remember from this call? So we'll give people a chance to write that down. We've gotten one other, and I'll read those in a moment. Christine, as they're coming in. After today's webinar, what do you most want us to believe?
That every single one of you and every one of your children or anyone you care about has the seeds of genius already within. And they don't have to be any different than they are right now. You don't have to be any different from who you are right now to tap into those seeds of genius. And that's what geniuses did. Like geniuses that you and I would call geniuses, that's what they did. They just tapped into those seeds. So I would love for people to just know that their kids and they themselves and their employees already have within them everything they need to succeed.
Thank you so much. But hold on, I'm going to read these out. So what are people taking away? As you heard a message that they're going to take home to their own kids, their 12 and 17-year-old. Somebody else said, I love these new gifts and love that Christine is being out there about this and looking forward to getting their results. So somebody is already going to be taking this. One person says there are many, many ways to succeed in life, and they happen on different timetables. And another person says that they will share this information with the public as part of their advocacy for a free market in education. And then the last person says that what really resonated with them is the idea that you can use these at any point, even in secret. You kind of don't have to be telling people, I'm using my gifts, but once you have them, it lights you up. And I agree, that's my takeaway as well. And one more that people are saying is, I will take this now to my kids. So thank you so, so much, Christine. Such a rich, in-depth talk. We will post this everywhere. It'll be a recording. And I wanted to point out that when we asked people to say, what are your gifts? Just a couple of people wrote theirs in, but in both of the cases, it was oratory. So I wonder if people are coming to this webinar because they don't want to read this in a blog post. They want to see Christine live.
Exactly. That's really
Thank you a ton. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Xenia. I loved being here. I loved hearing all the questions.
Thank you. All the best.